Welcome, everyone. I'm glad you're here. As Tina said, I'm Lisa Ragan, Director of Consumer Affairs and Peer Recovery Services for the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. I actually joined the department in 2005, so I have been doing this for a minute. And today I get to manage, it still just kind of blows me away. I manage about $9 million in state contracts for peer recovery services throughout Tennessee. It is very exciting stuff. I also get to oversee the Certified Peer Recovery Specialist program, which is near and dear to my heart. I truly love seeing peer support expand throughout our state. And one of the reasons I'm so passionate about peer support is because I'm a peer myself. I live a life of grateful wellness and recovery from complex PTSD. And these days, I am very much focused on post-traumatic growth. Have you heard that term? It's one of my favorite terms, post-traumatic growth. I really do believe that connecting with someone who's been there, who might have a similar story to yours, can provide someone with just absolutely unparalleled inspiration to keep going. And I know some of you all who are joining us today know that also and have seen that in the work that you do. I'm kind of going to start with just sort of some basics about peer support and about the certification program in Tennessee and what that looks like. And hopefully some of this you already know, but some of it you might not. So starting off with what is peer support? It's really just walking alongside someone on their road to wellness and recovery. It's empowering them to take personal responsibility for their own recovery and for their own health and wellness. It is giving and receiving mutually beneficial help to one another. Peer support is really like talking with people about their hopes and dreams and their goals and then what it might take to reach those hopes and dreams. Peer support is engaging them in a relationship where they feel safe, respected, and inspired. It's sharing our own experience, strength, and hope. You've probably heard that before. So who are certified peer recovery specialists? We're going to talk a lot about that. They are individuals who have lived experience of mental illness or substance use disorder or both, who have just really been doing really well in their recovery, have found this new place in their life that they're really excited about, their own journey of healing, and they want to give back to their community by providing peer support to others. So they end up becoming recovery role models, advocates, system navigators. They are excellent listeners, not surprisingly. They teach wellness skills, they lead support groups, and they share their own personal stories of wellness and recovery. Certified peer recovery specialists are hope dealers. Have y'all heard that term? Hope dealers. I've heard some folks say I used to be a dope dealer and now I'm a hope dealer. I kind of wanted to go over the whole process just a little bit. So to become a certified peer recovery specialist, like I said, first you've found your way to that place of wellness and recovery where you're doing really well. And realize that you might like to give back. So it's that recognition that you've sort of achieved a new state of being, a new state of wellness, whatever that looks like for you in relation to mental illness and or substance use disorder, and you want to help others along a similar path. State certification requires a minimum of 2 years of self-identified recovery. And what I mean by self-identified is we don't ask you to submit anything, or I don't know. It's just you saying, yes, you verify, yes, I have been in recovery or on a wellness path for at least 2 years. So then the next thing you do is fill out this really detailed 7-page application that gets all up in your business. Actually, it just asks questions about your strengths, your support system, what kind of, tell us a little bit about your plan for when you have increased symptoms or you experience triggers, and why you want to become a certified peer recovery specialist. Actually, I don't get to read through them as much as I used to. Michelle Webster on our staff is our peer recovery coordinator, and she's the one who reviews most of them. They're all carefully reviewed and scored according to a rubric. But whenever I do get to read them, they're so inspiring, y'all. Just to hear a little bit about people's journey and why they want to do that. I mean, I've been in tears sometimes reading them. I've been so touched by folks' stories. So like I said, they are scored. So every now and then someone doesn't score high enough to get into the training. It's kind of rare. Most of the time people do get in no problem, but when they don't, we're able to refer them to a couple different additional free trainings that can help prepare them. One is WRAP, the Wellness Recovery Action Plan. And a lot of times we'll find they're not familiar with it. And going through that can help significantly in understanding their own recovery and being able to talk about it and kind of put it into words. And then the other one is Introduction to Peer Support, which is a 2-day training provided by the Tennessee Mental Health Consumers Association. It's an excellent training, just a great introduction, low stress. It's just a great introduction to peer support, and works really, really well for folks who aren't quite ready for because the CPRS training itself really is an advanced training. So sometimes people need a little bit more preparation. Let's see. And then after completing the 40-hour training, which I'm going to talk about more in a minute, folks provide a minimum of 75 hours of direct peer support services under the supervision of an approved supervisor. So it's like they need to get at least 3 hours of supervision, 1 hour for every 25 hours of peer support delivered. And then those eligible supervisors are usually master's level clinicians, LADACs. They can be CPRS themselves if they meet the criteria. And then you submit your final application to achieve certification. I was hoping it would be helpful to kind of know the process behind it. It's a little more involved sometimes than people realize. Now, the training itself, I could talk about all day. I love our CPRS training. Like I said, it's an advanced training. It's kind of an intense week, 1 whole week, 40 hours. And it covers a wide range of topics. I'm only going to touch on some of them. There are many more, but it does cover communication skills, problem-solving approaches, ethics and boundaries. Y'all, we do 6 full hours. It's on Wednesday of ethics and boundaries, and it's an intense, it's powerful. It's a really good, powerful day, but it's pretty intense. Everybody's very tired at the end of Wednesday. It goes over cultural responsiveness, trauma-informed care, motivational interviewing, which is one of my favorite. And then there really is a lot more topics. The training does touch on like the basics of mental illness and substance use disorder, and a little bit on brain science too, but really the emphasis is more on providing peer support. There's a saying in peer support that we are experts in not being experts, and that takes a lot of expertise. just kind of a fun saying that we throw out there sometimes. We don't pretend to know everything, and we certainly don't tell people what to do. More on that later. So the format for the training, like I said, it is 1 week. And it's offered either in person or on Zoom. Y'all, when the pandemic hit, we waited a month or two thinking it would just pass by and we could start our trainings back up. And you know what happened with that. And so the idea of doing our training that includes role plays and all these discussions and all this, we couldn't imagine doing it virtually. And I am so happy to tell you we were completely wrong. It absolutely works virtually. Our trainers are amazing at it. They use those breakout rooms. And I gotta tell you, it's I like to describe it as part training and part personal retreat in a way, because you do a lot of self-examination throughout that week. And so we were and the group usually really bonds together. And we were afraid that wouldn't happen virtually, but it does. It still happens. So I'm happy to tell you that the virtual format does really work. And that's something we've continued even when we've gone back in person, getting kind of past this pandemic area, so that we could offer them in person at various cities throughout the state. But we've continued to offer the Zoom version too, which has been especially beneficial for, if people have medical issues where they might not be able to get to an in-person training, for people in some of the more rural areas where they might not have transportation. So it's really made it a little more accessible for some people like that. I wanted to tell you too, we track how many applications we get in per month, and it's been consistently over 100 for probably the past year or two, not slowing down. And so we have a contract with Tatus, and they hire the CPRS trainers. So they've been offering 3 to 4 trainings per month for quite a while now. It's just remarkable how much it's expanding. I think right now we have about 1,234 CPRS throughout the state of Tennessee. Yay! Isn't that fabulous? All right, I need to find my spot. I'm going to lose my spot here. Oh, yeah, I wanted to say that the training is taught by two trainers who are CPRS themselves. We have several amazing trainers. I also want to really emphasize that certified peer recovery specialists are trained to tell their story of lived experience. They learn how to touch on the hard times, but without too much graphic detail. We don't want to trigger people, as much as possible. And then they learn to focus a little bit more on really what helped them get them to where they are today, and what keeps them there. What kinds of things do they do on a daily basis to keep themselves going. And I could speak for myself on that too. I have a wrap plan myself that I use. We really do emphasize a trauma-informed approach. And I want to tell you too, ideally, a certified peer recovery specialist, I imagine, especially in the recovery court situation, they're actually going to be providing their lived experience, their personal story, tiny little tidbits here and there. As they're working with the individual, there might be a small anecdote here or there. It's also often a good idea to ask if it's okay. I kind of went through something similar. Do you want to hear about it? Because, give the person the opportunity to say no. Maybe they need to do all the talking that day. So we don't sit down and say, I am now going to tell you my personal story of recovery. Not at all. It really does work much better if you kind of weave it in. Peer support is an art and a skill. There's a lot of skill you can work on, but then it's an art too, using your judgment in how you're working with people. Um, so in thinking about weaving in the story, maybe even later on, you might share that you have lived experience of justice involvement. That it just varies on the person and what they might be needing. Sometimes folks need to talk, they need to feel safe, but they don't really need that much. They know the person's a peer, and that's enough. They don't necessarily need a lot of their story, but for other people, it's an excellent way to achieve engagement. It might be that participant's first time to even meet someone with a similar background who talks openly about it and is really living a meaningful life of wellness and recovery. So the certified peer recovery specialists also make a commitment to becoming lifelong learners. They are required to complete continuing education, 20 hours for every 2-year period of certification, and 2 of those hours need to be in ethics. Originally, we required that half of your hours could be online webinars or whatever, and half really needed to be in-person trainings. That's something else that changed with the pandemic. And it's also changed because these days your online, your virtual different webinars and things are way better than they used to, much more interactive and just like a higher quality, I think, than they were at one time. So at this point, all of your hours can be virtual if they need to be. That's perfectly fine. And like I said, there's required training in ethics. The certified peer recovery specialists abide by the code of ethics, and they also receive ongoing supervision from a behavioral health supervisor or another CPRS who has achieved supervisor status, which is, I think, 6,000 hours of direct peer support services, plus ongoing consultation with a behavioral health professional who's that master's level clinician or LADAC level. Let's talk more about what CPRS actually do. This is probably one of the biggest questions we get. Sometimes folks have a hard time wrapping their mind around it. So, like I said, certified peer recovery specialists share their experience, strength, and hope, and they excel at engagement. The research has showed us that when compared with behavioral health professionals, peers have an edge on engagement, and it makes sense, right? It's not at all surprising. So the certified peer recovery specialists who serve on your recovery court teams can engage individuals in their own healing journeys. They role model recovery. Their work can truly reduce recidivism and ultimately increase public safety, right? So because of their own lived experience with justice involvement, your recovery court CPRS can connect with the individual like no one else on the team can. They can really kind of form a different relationship with the participant and translate that into a really unique perspective on the individual's strengths. The certified peer recovery specialist can also help your team understand mental illness and substance use disorders better, kind of help them understand the brain science, like how a person's behaviors might not match their values and goals, especially if they're early in their recovery. That can be part of the journey. Certified peer recovery specialists use motivational interviewing in their work with folks, and they may be able to explain to the team kind of where they see the individual in terms of their readiness to change. And that can be really helpful for everyone to understand. I think in recovery courts, CPRS have their own, of course, they have their own perspective of their own lived experience. of the justice system, right? And so sometimes that means they can provide input to the team from that perspective. They can be like, well, what really helped me when I went through the program was ABC. Or it might be, if it were me and you were proposing that, path for me, I might have this kind of reaction. So that can be really, really beneficial too. Um, Usually peers are able to invest more time and effort into relationship. So much about peer support comes down to relationship. They walk alongside the participant, they do a lot of listening, they talk with them about their hopes and dreams, and sometimes help them connect their current choices and behaviors to reaching those hopes and dreams, so it might be, there's a disconnect here. Do you want to revisit your goals? Maybe you want to change them a little bit. And a lot of times they'll say no, and then you can kind of look at the behaviors and choices and what could be tweaked so that they might be able to move forward their goals. CPRSs are going to share snippets of their own experiences. And really, we're more interested in hopes and dreams, goals, than we are in symptom management. A lot of times the behavioral health system is really looking at symptom management, and that's not going to be your peers' emphasis necessarily, unless the person themselves is talking about it and wanting to get some help with that. So we're going to help them, like I said, connect those choices, those behaviors with their life goals. And the CPRS is going to role model that recovery is possible. This is, they can hear our story and see that we're doing okay. We did obtain full-time employment. We are contributing citizens to our communities. Certified peer recovery specialists can advocate for the peer and teach them how to advocate for themselves. I heard just last night, a speaker was talking about the subtle art of advocacy. And I loved that phrase, subtle art, because I think that's really powerful. Sometimes when we come on too strong, it can backfire. We don't want to be too passive. Anyway, I just really like that term. So the CPRS can help them navigate the justice system, the behavioral health system, community resources, all of that kind of thing. Now, there really are some things that it's not ideal for a certified peer recovery specialist to do as part of your recovery court. One of my favorites, really, first, is that they're not going to tell your participants what to do. The CPRS training really emphasizes throughout the whole week the skill of not giving advice. And this can be challenging. I actually think it's kind of human nature to want to give advice, especially if someone is going through something similar that you went through. And what if they're going to blow it, right? You're working with them and you can tell they're going to blow it. And you blew it in a similar way. So you really want to, tell them what to do and stop them from doing that. And that's exactly when you are not going to give them advice. You will have been working on this relationship, establishing a really non-judgmental place where they feel safe. So the CPRS can use their motivational interviewing skills, problem-solving skills, and help the individual discover for themselves what helps them maintain their own recovery. Peers are going to use those excellent listening skills and preserve the relationship. Very, very important. And another thing, certified peer recovery specialists are not telling people to be compliant with their medications. Again, that comes back to telling people what to do, right? They're not focusing on symptom management, like I said, unless the participant wants to talk about it. They're helping them connect their behavior to reaching their goals. And, it may be that taking their medication, asking for help, keeping that job, those kinds of things will help them reach their goals. And so they can use motivational interviewing to help the person get there themselves and see that for themselves. Again, it's that very non-judgmental space where you're, you know, in a very kind of kind, relaxed manner, asking questions. That ideally the certified peer recovery specialist work with the participant is going to be confidential. You don't want to put them in a position where they're having to tell on the participant. Confidential, of course, unless there's any kind of threat to themselves or others, then of course it wouldn't be, you'd seek out crisis services. So ideally, your peer is not doing drug testing, not doing the, you know, like monitoring curfews or doing home checks, doing employment checks, or issuing sanctions. And I want to point out, just remember what we are talking about right now is the ideal, the best practice, right, of using your certified peer recovery specialist on the recovery court team. Also, you can think about it this way. Ideally, your peers are the one who is going to meet with the participant after the drug screen, after the sanction has been issued, to talk about what happened, make a plan to get back on track. It's that non-judgmental space where they feel safe. They're going to connect. Using like this really physically relaxed presence and non-confrontational language, safe space. The CPRS might also have the opportunity at this point to share their own experience with making poor decisions in the past and then dealing with the consequences of those poor decisions. It always helps when, you know, you admit somehow you blew it, and the person you're talking to is like, oh yeah, me too. This is what happened. This is what happened to me. And you feel just a little bit better. All right. Have you guys seen this document? The organization called All Rise has published this toolkit called Incorporating Peer Recovery Support into Treatment Courts, Practice Guidelines for Treatment Court Professionals. How cool is this? It just came out in November, and I wasn't sure how many people had seen it. It's truly a research-based document that covers really helpful information. I was pretty impressed. They talk about the difference between like your court alumni and your certified peer recovery specialists. They offer 5 guidelines, very clear guidelines, and then it also has all these different appendices that'll include things like sample job interview questions, sample job descriptions, very helpful. I actually have a link at the end of this PowerPoint, and Tina said she'd be sure and send it out to everybody, so you'll be able to have this resource. So let's go through these 5 guidelines. And the first one is treatment court staff receive training on the core competencies of peer recovery support. Okay, so why is this important? Well, the members of your recovery court team really need to understand the peer role. And I think if you can follow this one guideline, it will eliminate all sorts of problems. Everyone needs to understand who the peer is on their team, so they're really not asked to do things that are outside of their role. It mentions core competencies. So what are the core competencies of peer recovery support services? So the core competencies in general would be the knowledge, values, skills, and abilities that a person needs to be effective in their role. And it just so happens that SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration with our federal government, has published core competencies for peer specialists. And to start with, they really kind of looked at the values and principles that peer support is founded on. And that included that it's recovery oriented, relationship focused. You've heard me emphasize relationships several times. It's person-centered, voluntary, and trauma-informed. I hadn't said this before, but peer support is always meant to be voluntary. The idea is no one is mandated to receive peer support. For the competencies themselves, SAMHSA has that a certified peer recovery specialist engages in caring, collaborative relationships, provides support, shares their lived experience of recovery. They personalize peer support, which means they don't take some kind of cookie cutter approach to providing peer support. It's really based on the individual and their needs. They support recovery planning and help individuals manage crises. And there's more. A certified peer recovery specialist can link individuals to resources, services, supports. They share information about health, wellness, recovery. They value communication and teamwork. They promote leadership and advocacy and promote self-growth and development. Hopefully all of that feels kind of familiar, and it really fits with everything we've been talking about today. So for guideline 2, it says the treatment court has written roles and responsibilities that align with peer recovery support services nationally recognized competencies and ethics. They're saying you're going to write it down, develop written roles and responsibilities, create clear job descriptions, read the CPRS Code of Ethics in the handbook. There's a CPRS handbook available on the state website, and I've included a link at the end so you can access that. For the peer role in the recovery court, we've really emphasized there needs to be a clear job description focusing on peer support. And I want to remind you that the CPRS needs to use their lived experience in the job. If they're not using their lived experience, it's not a peer role. Sometimes a peer kind of forgets that that's so important to what they're doing, and the individual they're working with doesn't even realize they're a peer, and that's significant. It's really meant to be an important part of the role. Also, if the job can be done by someone without lived experience, then it's not a peer role. If it's just case management and transportation, that can be done by someone who doesn't have lived experience. For case managers, really, the primary focus is on connecting the individual to the resources they need to be successful in the community. Case managers identify needs, help remove barriers to accessing resources, and they really excel at making those kind of connections. The certified peer recovery specialist is not trained to provide case management. They're trained to provide peer support. It's all about moving forward in recovery. So if you hire them on your team and you only have them doing case management, transportation, checking on compliance, I don't know that they're going to stay. It's not really what they signed up for, and it's certainly not what they were trained for. Now, do CPRS do case management duties? Sometimes, yes, absolutely. They can help connect folks to resources, services, and supports, particularly peer supports, recovery-focused supports like peer support centers, 12-step meetings, those kinds of things. And I know recovery courts are all different sizes. Some are very, very small, don't have very many people on the team. I just want you to know it's not meant to be the main focus on their job. CPRS want to help folks, absolutely, and they want to see them get connected to the resources they need to. It's just that sometimes when people are not familiar with peer support and they're writing job descriptions, that kind of thing, they can tend to focus on some of those more concrete activities, like resource connection. So these written roles and responsibilities are going to make it clear, that the certified peer recovery specialist is providing peer support. That's their focus. And ideally, they're not monitoring court compliance. They're not conducting drug tests, monitoring curfews, that kind of thing. Remember, peer support is ideally meant to eliminate that power differential as much as possible. Um, I do want you to hear from one of our certified peer recovery specialists connected with one of our recovery courts, Larry Latzman. I gave him a heads up, so he's not surprised. Larry, will you share with us for just a second how you enhanced your role by going into the county jail? Tell everybody about that.
Hello everyone. Actually, that's one of my favorite things, going to the county jails. I do that as a member of the recovery community. And one of the beautiful things about that, and a lot of people don't realize the effectiveness that we have. I sit on DeKalb Treatment Court and Van Buren Family Court, but in my local area, I'm a member of the recovery community. But going into the jail, I had a situation one day where there was a member that had been in jail multiple times. I was doing 12-step meetings, and he was offered a position to join a recovery court, and he didn't want to do it. And I looked at him, I said, look, recovery court is an awesome thing. I have several sponsees in 12-step that are part of it. And it took me a few weeks of every week in a meeting sharing that with him, but he got involved and he decided to become part of recovery court. And one day when I went to Morgan County with a sponsee who was speaking as an alumni at their banquet, this guy comes running up to me from recovery court, the same guy I saw in jail. And just to let you know, this same guy just celebrated 2 years of recovery this past Sunday. So that's just another one of the many roles where we can be of service even outside of actually the court itself. So thank you for letting me share that, Lisa.
Thank you, Larry. I appreciate your perspective on that. I just thought that was such a cool thing, a neat way to make that connection and inspire folks to really consider their recovery court, talking with someone who's more intimately connected with it. Okay, hold on. It's not forwarding. What do I need to do? There we go. All right, the third guideline. The treatment court program has established processes for recruiting, hiring, and orienting peer recovery support specialists to the treatment court. So, ideally, these positions are going to be full-time positions with benefits at a livable wage. You're hiring someone for their particular expertise, for their lived experience and training, what they can offer. And they really should be compensated fairly for that. Sometimes our human resources folks can get kind of nervous about recruiting and interviewing someone who self-identifies as essentially having a disability, so that the ADA does come into play and questions need to be considered carefully. This toolkit, y'all, has a list of sample questions you could ask in an interview. I thought they were very well done. Just the way they worded things. Ideally, what works so well is if you can just kind of ask a question that gives the interviewee the opportunity to share some of their personal story and why they're interested in this particular role. I've been through this just myself in hiring folks to work in our office, and you don't just come right out and say, do you have a mental illness or substance use disorder? you want to be a little more careful, but give them the opportunity to share some of their lived experience and why they're interested in the role. So one thing you can do that often your human resource people will really like is you can link to the state website where it talks about the Certified Peer Recovery Specialist certification and the eligibility for that. So you can say in your job announcement that the person needs to be a CPRS or eligible to become one. And then here's the link to more information. And that completely covers you and tends to make everybody happy all the way around. It is recommended that you really think through your orientation process so that you are setting up your CPRS for success right from the beginning. It can be really helpful for them to understand the other roles on the recovery court team. And, depending on the individual that you've hired, they may need help with different terms and phrases used in that system. Actually, the Bureau of Justice Assistance has a COSIP website. I forgot what COSIP stands for. And that has a toolkit on recruiting, hiring, and onboarding peer specialists. Ha ha. And another one called Support for Newly Hired Peer Recovery Specialists. I realize those aren't specifically for recovery court teams, but I think they still have really valuable information. And yes, I've included a link at the end for both of those. So I just wanted to make sure you knew those resources are out there. You really don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Guideline number 4. The treatment court ensures that peer recovery support specialists receive regular and ongoing external supervision from qualified staff. So certification requires that a certified peer recovery specialist receives regular ongoing supervision from a behavioral health supervisor. And that person is either a licensed master's level clinician, they're a LADAC, or they're a qualified certified peer recovery specialist themselves. A lot of time, then what we see on recovery court teams is that a peer will actually have 2 supervisors. They'll have one who's sort of their administrative supervisor connected with the court, and an external behavioral health supervisor who meets the required criteria for certification and can guide the peer with regard to behavioral health issues. That's really important. And actually, state certification does not dictate how often or in what format your CPRS receives supervision. So really the idea is that it's based on the job itself and what would be most appropriate for that role. Another thing that I want to mention regarding supervision is that sometimes if people are not so familiar with certified peer recovery specialists, they can unfortunately sort of lower their professional standards and for quality work. And I'm going to ask you to please don't do that. Don't give your CPRS a pass for less than desirable behavior because, well, they're a peer and they're struggling with their recovery or whatever. You need to hold them to the same professional standards as all of the other positions on your team. Ask yourself, how will you handle it if it were not a peer position? And a lot of times you can handle it in the same way with your peer. I also like to remind folks that really the CPRS's recovery is their business. What is your business is their behavior on the job. So if you're seeing poor performance, despite job coaching, despite training, ideally you're going to handle it like you would for any other staff on your team. I'd also like to emphasize the need for certified peer recovery specialists to prioritize self-care. Can I get an amen? I'm talking to myself too when I talk about self-care. Y'all, this can be emotional, intense work that we're doing. And it's imperative that they take good care of themselves, which means establishing good boundaries. They might need reminders about that, just as we all do sometimes, right? I actually do a whole presentation on self-care. So sometimes when my own self-care is slipping a little bit, I'm like all by myself and I feel extra embarrassed because here I am giving presentations about it. And it turns out I'm human and not always perfect about it either. Guideline number 5. Peer recovery specialists receive annual ethics training, and policies and procedures are in place to address ethical issues. Cannot emphasize this one enough. In fact, our certified peer recovery specialists sign a document at their training that they promise to abide by the CPRS Code of Ethics, which is found in the CPRS handbook on the state website. And then when the peer submits their renewal application every 2 years, they sign off saying, I affirm that I have not violated the CPRS Code of Ethics during the past 2 years. And the supervisor is also asked to sign off confirming that the CPRS has not violated the Code of Ethics during that time period. So I'd also recommend including ethics training as much as possible. For certification, we don't require anything specific. There's actually a lot out there. Our state website even has our past peer conferences, and each of those has recordings of ethics workshops that were presented, sometimes ethics keynotes. And I keep saying this, I've included a link at the end that has those as well. But I knew of a supervisor once who would meet regularly with the CPRS on her staff. They usually did group supervision. So they would conduct their, review of cases, whatever kind of business they needed to attend to. But then she would set aside time every time to review an ethics scenario and then have a whole discussion about it. How would you handle this? What issues do you see in this scenario? And I just thought that was so smart. You cannot do too much training on ethics and boundaries. Like I said, we do 6 hours of ethics and boundaries in the training itself, but it's just a start. It's the kind of thing that you really need on an ongoing basis. I also wanted to mention credential verification. I'm so excited to tell you we are working with a developer to create an online portal just for certified peer recovery specialists, and they'll be able to submit applications, upload their continuing education, take care of their renewal, everything right there in that portal. And then it's also going to include a public facing component that'll be used for credential verification. So you can go there and look up an individual and find out if they're current in their certification, when does it expire, that kind of thing. Right now you can call our office, and I included the phone number there. But you can call our office to verify that someone's a certified peer recovery specialist. And once this new portal launches, you'll be able to do it with an online search. But I really want to urge you or your HR folks to verify. We have gotten ethics complaints in the past on peers only to find out they're not certified. We've never heard of them, and no one checked. So do verify that your folks are certified. Alrighty, we have been talking a lot about peer support, but does it work? So this toolkit in particular from All Rise includes significant references to research showing the positive results for peer support in treatment courts specifically. So their research shows peer support specialists have helped lower recidivism risk for program participants, increased participant engagement with treatment. You've heard me say engagement several times. And their engagement with their court obligations and other services, and increased individual reports of, this is my favorite, y'all, increased individual reports of empowerment, motivation, and hopefulness. How awesome is that, right? That can make all the difference right there. In fact, there has been a wealth of research associating peer support with reduced use of inpatient and crisis services, reduced substance use, and increased engagement in their own recovery. So yes, it really does work. I also wanted to share something else with you about the certified peer recovery specialists in Tennessee who are working with justice-involved individuals. They've recently started a justice-focused peers task force that is comprised of CPRS throughout the state working with justice-involved individuals in a variety of ways, whether it's community supervision inside the correctional facilities, recovery courts, and others. They are really just getting started with their goals and objectives, but one thing that they are interested in, and that I'm really interested in for them, is an advanced training that we want to make available in Tennessee for CPRS working with justice-involved folks. They have this advanced training in Georgia, and we've been talking with them about it. It's called their Forensic Peer Mentor Training. It's a 1 week, 40-hour training. So we've been talking with them about bringing that to Tennessee. And it's actually a train the trainer model too. So once we got it going, we could really keep that going in Tennessee. We're excited about that potential. All right, y'all, I'm sure you could tell I believe in the power of peer support wholeheartedly. I know that the certified peer recovery specialists on your recovery court teams can help the participants find their way to becoming contributing members of society, repair relationships with their family, find their way to a job, a home, stability, and security, and they can find hope for the future. This is that list of helpful links I kept talking about. The toolkit is there at the beginning, and then some of the other toolkits. There's a National Association of Peer Supporters, and they have national practice guidelines that are helpful. SAMHSA's core competencies are on there. And then our own certified peer recovery specialist program with the state, and the peer conference archived recordings. So take a look at that when you get it. And that's really kind of it for my presentation. Here's my contact information. I want to encourage you to reach out if you have any questions. But right now, I would love to hear from you. Do you have any questions, or did anything that was discussed really resonate with you? If you want to go ahead and unmute and share, this is the time.
So Lisa, I was at the presentation given at All Rise back last summer by Dr. Ben Warmer. Is that her name? I think that's her name. And in that presentation, she mentioned, along with the other women that were presenting about CPRS, that the CPRS should work for an agency, not necessarily be a direct employee of the court. So in the chat, I had already asked this, but I thought since you were asked us to do it. With that being said, what does the state suggest? And if you agree, what agencies do you encourage partnership with for this service, specifically for a mental health court? Because I know for us, I've reached out to some of the mental health agencies locally about partnering and using a CPRS within our mental health court and kind of working together.
Mhm.
But I wanted to hear your opinion on that.
That's really interesting, and I'm just not sure you could make a blanket statement like that, at least for Tennessee. You know, every state is so different in how they have their services set up. Some of them, all your behavioral health services are by county. Sometimes they're all run by the state, you know, but not so in Tennessee. Ours is 100% managed care. So we have all these different nonprofit agencies. When I said that I manage 9 million in state contracts, that's with places like Centerstone and Volunteer and Frontier. So when you look at the state as a whole, gosh, it varies a lot what your resources might be. So that might be an option in some areas, and in others it might not be. Yeah, so I think it would just depend. I really do. There's nothing wrong with them working for the behavioral health agency, of course, and it is important for them to get that supervision support from a behavioral health professional. But I don't know that that would be possible in our state anyway. Larry, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, you did. Actually, I was gonna I wanted to respond to that in part as well. In reading the guideline that they just put out that you're gonna pass out on page 8, it says when designing the role of peer recovery support specialist, treatment court teams carefully consider the pros and cons of having the support specialist attend treatment court staffing. And again, these are guidelines. And each court now, I think, needs to decide for themselves what works best. I happen to be actually on a treatment court team, not as a paid member, but I work for Volunteer Behavioral Health. I attend as a CPRS, but I've been offered several jobs by the state as a CP or by different courts as a CPRS. So I think, again, like you answered, that I think each individual court needs to decide that. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that understanding who we are, getting to know that person that you interviewed for the position, where does our recovery come from? Just like I believe for recovery courts, somebody who's grounded in 12 steps and maybe has some justice involvement might be a better fit. For a family treatment court, you might want to consider a certified family support specialist, or a juvenile court, maybe a young adult certified peer support specialist. So that's all I really wanted to share.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that, or any other topic that we covered?
I have a question if nobody else has a question. Misty, you go first.
Oh, well, I was just gonna make a statement to what she asked about the payment. So I am kind of like Larry, like I'm working under a recovery court and I'm a CPRS, but my position is actually a case manager. But we're looking to add a CPRS. And I know that, like, as far as contracting from other agencies, I know we're still growing and building that network. So there's not a whole lot available yet, but like we can use our funds. I think our intentions are to use some of the funding that we have to pay for services. And then the CPRS would be self-employed, kind of like we pay a treatment provider to come do IOP classes and things like that. I think we would just designate so much of our funding to pay for the service of the CPRS rather than them being an actual like paid staff member. I don't know if that helps, but
What about their supervision?
so I think our treatment provider would be able to cover that. He's actually signed off on all of my supervision as, separate from recovery court, but I think we have that covered that way. So
We do recommend that certified peer recovery specialists are employed by an agency, and not necessarily kind of off on their own.
okay.
They're not allowed to like hang out a shingle and provide private practice.
Right.
But it sounds like what you're talking about might be a little bit different. And the supervision is really some of the most important, you want to make sure that's in place.
So the best practice would be to get someone definitely that's already hired on as a CPRS through some agency, right?
Right. Either they're working for the court itself or for a behavioral health agency.
Okay.
Marie? Hi, Marie.
Hello. Hi,
Mhm.
everybody. I'm really interested in the training requirements for the CPRS
Mhm.
folks, and what if we need to find ways to have more content provided for them, or are they getting their training needs pretty well met? Because I know that there's some really specific things that are required, or that they can't use as their training credits. And I don't know how well we really do at this point in what we provide if they're getting that from our conferences or our lunch and learns. Do you know what I mean?
I do, yes. Thank you for bringing that up, actually. I think some guidance could be really helpful often in terms of their continuing education, just helping them find things that will be really beneficial for the work that they're doing. And since it's a violation of the Code of Ethics for a CPRS to provide clinical treatment, then we don't accept clinical trainings as part of their recertification. When they're submitting their continuing education, we try to accept as much as possible. But if it's clinical treatment, we're like, yeah, that one doesn't work. It just didn't make sense to us to say it's a violation of the Code of Ethics, and then so you're not submitting that. However, if you take that kind of training, that's none of our business. It's whether or not you submit it for recertification, if that makes sense. There are plenty of folks out there who are CPRS and they're working on their LADAC too. So they are taking some of those clinical treatment trainings and peer trainings. So we're just asking that you send the peer trainings to us and not the clinical. Is that the kind of thing you were talking about, Marie?
Yes. And so for the clinical training, do you have some specific criteria that you use to make that decision? And I'll tell you why I'm asking the question, because for recovery court teams, of course, you have a variety of agencies that are part of that team, and everybody needs to understand what's happening. And that includes the clinical nature of interventions.
Mhm.
So we, in fact, provide CLE that's approved for attorneys to attend things that include clinical information in it. I don't necessarily go and ask for CLE approval for something that is specifically for clinicians to deepen their work,
Mhm.
or an advanced clinical session per se. But if it's got clinical information in it, to us, the team needs to know about that. People that are working with the recovery court need to know about that. And so CLE is provided so that folks that are not just clinicians can in fact participate. So that's why I'm asking, do you have like really specific criteria that you use, or if it has clinical information in it, you're not gonna allow it?
I think generally it's much more kind of straightforward than that. It'd be like a session on providing cognitive behavioral therapy. You know what I mean? Not information about what DBT is. That's very different. That's not providing DBT. So a lot of times, Michelle Webster, our peer recovery coordinator, she usually fields these. We'll just call and ask questions. If it's not clear by the title. Sometimes the title makes it sound clinical and it's really not necessarily. So yes, anytime it's just information, that's very helpful. So generally it needs to be really specifically training someone to provide a clinical treatment intervention kind of thing.
Okay, that makes me think that most of the content, like from the conference we just had, would be approved then, because most of it, with the exception of maybe 2 sessions, was not enough for everybody.
And maybe we need to meet with Michelle and y'all and kind of talk that through to make it clearer. I don't know. We certainly could. What else, y'all?
We have a question from our Turner, who's wondering, because they are a probation officer, would they be allowed to become a CPRS?
Really, it's all about if you have lived experience of mental illness or substance use disorder and you're willing to self-identify in that way. So becoming a CPRS and being a probation officer, whether or not you use that as a probation officer is between you and your employer, I would think. But becoming a CPRS for certification, state certification purposes is just about your willingness to self-identify and go through the training and all of that. Does that answer your question? I think it'd be really cool, but that's just me.
They said yes, thank you.
Sure.
Any other additional questions out there? You can drop them in the chat or unmute. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Ms. Lisa, for jumping on and chatting with us. We will make sure to get out the evaluations so that anyone that is receiving continuing education credits can receive them. And of course, we will also send out the presentation as well for the slides. And I know someone did ask if the slides, if they can share them with their team. So is that okay with you as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect.